Hello and welcome everybody to this XTB live news. My name is Walid Koudmani, a market analyst for XTB. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the main events happening in the markets today, what to keep an eye on from the economic calendar, what to keep an eye on the charts. So we've had quite an interesting day, and what we can expect moving into this final session of the week, with today being Friday, the 18th of June, 2021. So from an economic calendar point of view, not much actually from a macro point of view, as I said, but we did have a speech from a Fed member, Bullard. So he actually mentioned that he was one of the members to vote towards a rate hike in 2022. That we saw had a massive impact on the markets, with gold, indices, and even the US dollar all moving along with that. And that came after also another decision by the central bank just a few days ago, which we covered and we talked about if you missed yesterday's webinar. But we talked about all of that because inflation and any sort of news from the Fed is actually triggering some serious moves in the markets, because it signals the change in fiscal policy, which then would signal a change in availability of cash into the markets. So markets are working at the moment under the assumption that the economic conditions are going to be the same for a significant amount of time. So let's say a couple of years. But the Fed, and especially today, one of the members mentioned that it was likely or possible that they would have to change it unexpectedly or sooner than expected. So that led to these or some of these moves, or is one of the factors that led to these moves. So let's take a look at these moves and what we're talking about when we say that. So let's start with the DAX, which you can see huge drop on the DAX, DE30 on the platform, from actually very close to its all-time high, dropping, you can see here, over 2%, and in fact from the all-time high we can see 2.5%, trading at the lowest level since the end of May now, and just testing this area which in the past acted as a support and price reaction area. We were just mentioning just a few days ago this area over here, which was acting as a resistance to see if it was able to break through it or not. Clearly it wasn't able to, but we did have the news from the Fed, so not necessarily all because of a technical thing happened, but it is interesting to note these levels and whether or not it can break through them. Now at the moment we are testing this area which in the past acted as a support, breaking through this previous one which only was tested a few times, but now still in this range, and you can see lowest level since May. Very interesting for the DAX. US 100, which if you follow the WhatsApp, you'll have seen the notification on this, but also actually, interestingly enough, very close to its all-time high. So it actually, while other indices were performing more, let's say, poorly, the Nasdaq Tech Index was actually able to continue the upward move, reach a new all-time high, and actually is pulling back today and testing this previous area here, which if we can draw a rectangle, you can see these areas here have acted as some price reaction or some reaction areas. So always interesting to keep an eye on. Plus, we also coincide with the 50-hour SMA. So the blue line you can see here, and the bottom level of this range. Also interesting to note the RSI, which is at 10.9, so extremely oversold on that end. The S&P, so the US 500, a slightly different story, so a little bit further away from its all-time high, which is interesting because we've noticed the opposite actually happening on the way up. So we saw the S&P, the US 500, being able to reach all-time highs faster than the Nasdaq, but on the way down we are also seeing a delay on that end with the Nasdaq dropping after. So S&P so US 500 about 2.4%, 2.45% from the all-time high. Also testing similar area to the US 100 tech index, and you can see that just on the look of the charts, they look quite similar. If I compare them, you can see we are testing similar areas on the DAX as well. Actually, it looks a little bit more like the DAX than the S&P, which is an interesting thing to note because one is US and one is American, obviously. So when it comes to commodities, on the other hand, we touched on gold dropping to key levels once again. Very important because you can see this. We talked about this area around 1775 for a long time, weeks. And that was because it was actually trading in this area and acted as a support for a long time. So we can see that now we are heading back after this drop. So gold was on a huge upward move, reaching a high of $1,912 before testing it a few times and then pulling back. And this is where we were talking about it most recently, around 1800, 1880. And then we saw just this drop, huge drop, almost 8%. Actually, let's see. Yeah, about almost 8% from the recent high, dropping as low as 1775, basically canceling all the move that happened since the end of April and just erasing everything and trading back at the beginning. So where we started in the middle of April. And so that's very interesting to see for gold. But if I do show you the overlaid chart of the US dollar index, you can see an interesting correlation. You can see that US dollar index pushing very, very high up and the dollar pushing way down. And we'll see that correlation as well when we go to other currency pairs. So gold at a very interesting level. We talked about this yesterday in the webinar if you missed that as well. Other than that, we can take a look at oil, which second day in a row of negative, closing lower, but still remaining above a very important level. So above $70 for sure, and above 71.58 at the moment, testing this area. But it remains to be seen if it will be managed to close higher or actually also start pulling back, and we could see it test this area heading into the weekend. Some pressures on oil. We have the Iran deal potentially happening with an increase in production, or exports rather. We also have potential demand concerns with return of lockdowns, but there are both sides to this argument for oil. So it's an interesting market to follow, especially when you take a look at how positive it has been recently. You can see gaining over 16% just since the end of May, and at the moment testing highs. Brent, similar situation. You can see quite similar moves. But if we go and take a look at currency pairs on the market analysis section, you can see the US dollar very clearly the best performing currency. Let's say even with the yen, but with everything else performing very well. The yen tends to perform sometimes better when indices are doing poorly as a safe haven, but the dollar is dominating today. The euro actually surprisingly quite positive performance, while the pound is negative. Although we do await next week's Bank of England decision, so that's going to be something to keep an eye on. Clearly, the central banks have had a very important impact throughout the pandemic and still do. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on for the reaction from the Bank of England to what the Fed did, and how that's going to then impact the markets, because we also have some data coming from the UK. So that's going to be also important and relevant, along with the fact that we just got a 4-week delayed lockdown reopening. So that's all going to be playing into that, and the pound next week and the UK index. Pound, as I said, slightly more negative. New Zealand dollar, quite negative, while the yen is actually gaining against most. So if we go and take a look at the pairs, pound dollar, similar situation to gold. You can see on the end of completely erasing any gains made in the last, let's say, couple of months, or at least 1 month, because we're still in June. But you can see this upward move that brought it around 142.5, so the highest level in quite some time, and then all the way down almost over 3%, currently trading at 138.1, so testing another important level, because it had to break through obviously 141, 140, 139, and all these other areas. But you can see that continually reaching lower lows and lower highs, and then just trending downwards for the moment being. Currently testing this area here, which if I draw the line, you can see coincides with this other previous support. So interesting to see on this end, but you can see the dollar strength, and this is going to be interesting to see how the central bank, as I said, from the UK reacts to this. Euro dollar, on the other hand, with the overlaid chart of the US dollar index, you can see pull back on euro dollar, not as much as the pound, with euro dollar still around 118.7, but definitely nowhere near the 122 that we saw, or 121 that we saw for quite some time just recently. US dollar index, as I said, on the gold chart, you can see pushing up, and quite a symmetrical correlation here you can see between the two, where one is increasing while the other is decreasing. And so I think that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you missed yesterday's webinar, we were talking about some what's happening with the central banks, how they impact the markets, just a general market overview. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and feel free to leave a like and subscribe. And good luck with your trading. My name is Walid Koudmani, market analyst for XTB. See you next week. Thank you very much.